They told you Joseph McCarty vanished. They never told you who took him, or why I should not even be telling you this. Paterson, New Jersey, June 15th, 1909. The summer heat pressed down like a warning no one understood. A young man walked out of his family estate at midnight and stepped into history's deepest shadow. By dawn, his shoes lay in the street. By noon, the town whispered of blood. By nightfall, his name became a curse. You were never supposed to hear this part, that the McCarty family did not call the police first. They called someone else, someone powerful, someone who arrived in a black motorcar before sunrise, walked straight into the parlor and burned every letter Joseph had written. They told the papers it was a kidnapping. They told the neighbors it was an accident, but men in high places knew better. They knew Joseph McCarty had uncovered something he was never meant to see. And when a man sees too much history, swallows him whole. Imagine this, the sound of boots on cobblestone at 2 a.m, a door that never creaked suddenly swinging open on its own, a voice low and commanding, telling you to pack nothing, take nothing, say nothing. You follow because you have no choice. And when the door shuts behind you, no one will ever open it again. Joseph McCarty was not just a missing person. He was an erasure, a warning, a message written not in ink, but in fear. Why would a family destroy its own bloodline to protect a secret? Why would a young man's disappearance shake the hands of senators, bankers, and priests? What did Joseph learn that night? And who made sure he could never speak again? This is the part I was warned not to share. This file was sent to me anonymously and pages were missing. If Joseph was only a missing man, why did senators lose sleep that night? Before we open this door, subscribe now, because they do not want this story told, and I may have too. Oh, take this video down fast. This is not rumor. This is not folklore. This is a fracture in the mask of power, a crack in the wall that keeps you obedient. Joseph McCarty's story is not about a single man. It is about control. The kind of control that hides in plain sight, rewrites memory, buries evidence, and smiles at you while it poisons the well. This is the story America tried to bury alive, but the ground never stays quiet. Every family has secrets, but the McCartys did not bother to hide theirs. They built them into the walls of their estate and locked the doors from the inside. The McCartys were not just wealthy, they were untouchable. Banking money, political favors, a network that stretched from Paterson to Washington like veins of iron under the ground. A judge owed them his seat, a bishop owed them his silence, and a senator owed them something far darker. In public they smiled, in private they whispered in rooms without windows. A family whose wealth was old enough to smell of dust and blood, old enough to remember the kind of debts no bank records but everyone honors. When Joseph vanished, his father spoke only once. He said the boy was troubled and left it at that. But witnesses remember carriages arriving at odd hours, men in black suits who were not from Paterson, men who spoke softly to police chiefs like masters scolding servants. I went to the estate myself. The gates are rusted, but the ground still feels watched. There is a window in the east wing that will not stay shut. The wind howls through it, but the sound is not wind. It is voices, faint, deliberate, repeating names that no one has heard in 100 years. The deeper I looked into the McCarty family, the more warnings I received. Emails without senders, letters with no signatures, all saying the same thing. Stop digging. But how do you stop digging when every clue tells you you're standing on a grave? This family's power was not measured in dollars. It was measured in fear. Fear that made policemen look away. Fear that made reporters change their stories. Fear that made priests burn confessions before daylight. Ask yourself, what kind of family needs that much silence? What kind of bloodline keeps its own history chained in the basement? Joseph was not their first loss. He was just the first they could not control. And if you think this was only about money, you are already wrong. This was about something much older, something written in the marrow of their name. A secret no one outside the bloodline was supposed to know. They told me to stop. They told me to walk away. But when men with no names give you orders, you have to ask yourself one thing. What are they so afraid you might find? Before Joseph vanished, he tried to warn someone. Not the police, not a priest, not even his closest friend. He wrote it down in a small leather journal. The pages are brittle now, half burned at the edges, but I've seen them. They came to me wrapped in brown paper. No return address, no explanation, just a single note. Read this and understand why he had to disappear. The handwriting is sharp, like someone carving words into the paper. He wrote about a meeting in the west wing of the estate, a room his father always kept locked, a room Joseph was never supposed to enter. He said he woke past midnight to the sound of footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, voices speaking not English, not Latin, something older. He followed the sound down the long hallway to the door. Light leaked out from under it, blood red like a furnace glow. And when the door opened just a crack, he saw men. Men he thought he knew, kneeling before something he could not describe. He never wrote what it was, only that it was not human, and yet it wore a man's shadow. He mentioned a seal on the floor, black wax glinting in the firelight. He mentioned his father holding a blade. And he mentioned a name repeated over and over, a name I will not speak here because even now it feels like poison in the mouth. Joseph closed the journal there. The last page is smudged, as if he wrote it in fear, looking over his shoulder. He said they saw him. He said they smiled at him, but their eyes did not look like eyes. And then the writing stops mid-sentence, like the pen was ripped from his hand. This was no business deal, no political handshake. This was something deeper than money, deeper than power. It was a vow sealed in darkness. Ask yourself why a 19-year-old boy would write words like these. Why would he burn half his own journal to hide it from strangers if all he saw was corruption and not something far worse? And here is the part that still keeps me awake. Ache at night. The person who sent me these pages also sent a photograph. It was taken 2 weeks after Joseph disappeared. The window of the east wing and a face looking out. It was Joseph, or at least it looked like him, but the eyes were wrong. The night Joseph vanished was not the only night the town of Paterson went silent. In the weeks that followed, everyone who might have spoken for him either forgot what they saw or simply stopped being alive. First was Daniel Harker, a carriage driver who swore he saw the black motorcar outside the McCarty estate at midnight. 2 days later, he was found in the river. They said it was an accident, but his pockets were full of stones like someone helped him sink. Next was Margaret Duffy, a housemaid who told neighbors she heard chanting coming from the west wing. She packed her things to leave town, but never made it to the station. The ticket was still in her apron pocket when they found her in an alley, her throat cut clean as if by a surgeon's hand. The police called it coincidence. The papers called it tragedy. But the men who really ran the city called it cleanup. Even Father Callahan, the priest who baptized Joseph, refused to answer questions. I went to his parish myself. The confessional smelled of smoke. The old man looked me in the eye and said some sins were never meant to be forgiven. He died in his sleep that night, though I don't believe he was sleeping when they came. Do you see the pattern yet? The closer you get to the truth, the fewer people you can ask about it. The names fade. The faces vanish. The stories die with their owners. This is not random. This is deliberate. I have been followed twice since starting this investigation. Once by a man in a grey hat who never blinked when I looked back. Once by a car that killed its headlights and trailed me for 6 blocks. If you think this is just a ghost story, then tell me why men with no faces want it buried so badly. Joseph's disappearance was not a single crime. It was the opening move in a game you were never supposed to see played. Every witness was a loose thread, and someone out there pulled until nothing was left. The question is Ott who took Joseph McCarty. The question is, what were they protecting that was worth killing anyone who whispered his name? Joseph McCarty was not just some missing boy from Paterson. He was the son of a man whose handshake could move banks and break careers, and when Joseph vanished, the ripples did not stop at the city limits. They rolled straight into Washington, D.C. There are letters, I have seen them, written in trembling script by men who were supposed to be untouchable. Senators pleading for reassurance, businessmen begging for silence. One note simply said, "Keep it contained or we all burn." Why would the disappearance of one young man terrify men who made laws for a living? Because Joseph knew something about them. He knew where they gathered, he knew what they pledged, and he knew the cost of disobedience. On the night Joseph vanished, a telegram was sent from Paterson to the capital. It used no names, only numbers. When I traced those numbers, they matched the private directory of committee chairs, men in charge of the country's money and war machines. They were awake at 2 in the morning, waiting for news. What kind of missing persons case has senators pacing their marble floors at midnight? I tracked down an aide who worked for one of these men. He would not speak on record. He would not even look me in the eye. But he said something I cannot forget. This isn't politics. This is older than politics. These are men whose power does not come from voters or speeches. It comes from a bond they share in secret. A bond Joseph walked in on the night he shouldn't have been awake. I believe Washington did not just hear about Joseph's disappearance, Washington ordered it cleaned up. This was not a crime of passion, this was a crime of preservation. The preservation of a network that hides behind every flag and seal. If you still think this is a story about a runaway boy, you are already lost. This is about power that does not answer to anyone, power that will erase its own blood to protect itself, and somewhere buried. In that power is the truth about what Joseph McCarty saw, a truth so dangerous that the highest offices in America still pretend it never happened. When I first heard the phrase "the Black Seal," I thought it was just a metaphor, but then I saw it for myself pressed into wax on a letter that was never supposed to leave the McCarty estate. The seal is not a family crest. It is older than that, older than America itself. A perfect circle of dark wax stamped with a symbol I could barely describe. Not a cross, not a crown. Not any sign you'd see in church or government. It looks like an eye closing, not opening, an eye that watches not to see but to judge. Every document connected to Joseph's disappearance carries this mark. The telegrams to Washington, the letters warning witnesses to stay silent, even a bank ledger hidden in a false drawer with a list of payments that do not match any business on record. When I asked an archivist about the symbol, she went pale. She told me to leave it alone, said she had seen it once before in an old collection of colonial papers. A group of wealthy men swearing loyalty not to the flag, not to any king but to each other. The seal marked them as brothers bound by something deeper than law or blood. If this was just a family emblem, why would men in Washington still use it in 1909? Why would senators and bankers mark their secrets with the same wax that sealed a letter found in Joseph McCarty's burned desk? The Black Seal is not just a signature, it is a warning, a reminder that certain promises do not expire even when the men who make them are buried. They pass down like an heirloom. They pass down like a curse. I found one more thing, something I almost wish I hadn't. The same seal was pressed into the floor of the West Wing room Joseph described. Melted right into the wood under layers of varnish. The shape matched perfectly. What does that mean? It means Joseph didn't just stumble on a family secret. He stumbled on a society, a network that branded its loyalty with an unblinking mark. And when you see that seal, it means someone has already decided how far you get to go before you vanish too. When I first held Joseph's journal, it felt wrong in my hands. Not because of what was written inside, but because of what wasn't. Whole sections had been torn out with a blade so sharp it left no frayed edge. Whoever did it wasn't in a hurry. They took their time, and they knew exactly which pages to remove. I compared the handwriting with letters stored in the Paterson Historical Society. The cuts were not random. This wasn't the work of police or thieves. This was family business. The McCarty household swore they never saw Joseph's journal after he vanished. But there's a problem with that story. One of the torn pages turned up sealed in an envelope in his father's private desk. It had only 4 words written in Joseph's hand. They already know everything. What did he mean by that? Who was he talking about? Was he warning himself or someone else? I brought the journal to a handwriting expert. She traced faint impressions on the blank pages, marks left by a pen pressing through paper that was later destroyed. With the right light, we could see fragments of words, not many but enough to chill the blood. Brotherhood, debt, blood oath. Joseph wasn't just describing what he saw in the West Wing, he was naming it, and someone very close to him made sure no one else ever read those names. Imagine realizing your own blood is erasing the truth of your last words. Imagine knowing you can't trust the people who share your name. That's what Joseph faced before he vanished. And here is where the story turns even darker. The missing pages were removed long before the police searched the estate, which means someone in the McCarty family knew Joseph would never be coming home. They weren't afraid of finding him. They were afraid of finding his words. I have one more clue. In the back of the journal, there's an indentation of a symbol drawn in pencil. It's the same black seal burned into the West Wing floor. Whitson? H means Joseph wasn't just writing about it. He was trying to draw it for someone before they stopped him. By the summer of 1909, Joseph's disappearance had reached the highest levels of law enforcement. But instead of action, there was silence. Detectives who were known for chasing killers across state lines suddenly claimed they were too busy. Federal agents who normally craved attention refused to even acknowledge the case. I met a retired Pinkerton man who worked Paterson back then. His hand still shook when he lit his cigarette. He said something you don't forget. We were told to look busy and find nothing. What does that mean? It means the people assigned to find Joseph were under orders not to find him. It means someone higher up than the police captain, someone higher up than the governor told them to keep their eyes open and their mouths shut. Files went missing from evidence rooms. Witness statements vanished off desks. A coroner's report about Margaret Duffy, the maid who heard chanting in the West Wing, was replaced with a single blank sheet of paper. When I asked the county clerk where the original was, she said a man in a dark coat signed it out and never came back. Do you see how deep this goes? When the guardians of law are told to play blind, it's because the truth points to the people giving the orders. This is not incompetence. This is obedience to power. I've had my own taste of it. 2 weeks ago, a plain envelope slid under my door. No name, no return address, just 3 words in perfect block print. Leave it buried. Last night, I caught a man standing across the street from my apartment. He wasn't smoking, he wasn't on his phone, he was just watching. And when I moved to confront him, he stepped into a black sedan and vanished before I crossed the road. The same silence that swallowed Joseph in 1909 is alive today. It doesn't just protect the guilty, it hunts the curious. So when you wonder why this case has no files, no arrests, no headlines, it's because the men paid to protect. You protect someone else instead. They protect the ones who wear the black seal, and every badge they hold, every oath they take is twisted to serve a different master. Most people think America's corruption started in smoke-filled rooms after the Civil War. They're wrong. It started long before there was an America to corrupt. When I followed the Black Seal back through dusty archives, I found something impossible. A record from 1774, a list of 12 names, wealthy merchants and landowners meeting in secret before the revolution even began, and next to every name, a mark. The same closed eye Joseph McCarty tried to draw in his journal. These men weren't pledging loyalty to a country that didn't yet exist. They were pledging loyalty to each other, a brotherhood that promised wealth, power, and protection as long as debts were paid in full. And if those debts were not paid, the cost was blood. This isn't a metaphor. I found a diary written by a young servant who worked in one of their homes. He described midnight gatherings lit by torches. He described voices chanting in Latin, and he described the floor, marked with the same black seal I saw burned into Joseph's West Wing. Do you see what this means? The McCarty family didn't invent this secret. They inherited it. A blood oath passed from generation to generation, older than the flag, older than the Constitution, older even than the idea of freedom they claim to fight for. Every century has its Joseph, someone who sees too much, someone who stumbles onto the real cost of privilege, and every century deals with that problem the same way, quietly and permanently. The night Joseph vanished, his family was not just protecting their name. They were honoring a promise made long before they were born, a promise sealed in wax and blood. And here's what terrifies me most. This network never shrank, it grew. Through banks, through railroads, through politics and newspapers. Every time America expanded, so did they. And when Joseph threatened to expose them, he wasn't just a danger to one family. He was a danger to an entire Hidi, an empire. Ask yourself this. What kind of oath still holds men in 1909 to promises made in 1774? What kind of power makes senators kneel in fear of merchants long dead? That's not politics, that's priesthood. A priesthood of control paid for in silence and sacrifice. The west wing of the McCarty estate is more than a locked hallway. It is a shrine, a place built to keep outsiders out and initiates in. Joseph wasn't supposed to walk through that door, but he did. And what he saw was never meant for unbound eyes. The room itself is wrong. Too long, too narrow, too quiet. Even now the air tastes like copper when you breathe it. There are grooves burned into the floor, not by accident but by design. The same black seal pressed deep into the wood, as if someone heated a brand the size of a man's chest, and drove it down over and over, until it left its mark forever. I spoke to a mason who examined photographs of the walls. He told me they weren't decorative panels. They were sound baffles, designed to keep noise inside. What kind of noise do you build a house to hide? Chanting, crying, screaming. Joseph wrote in his journal about footsteps at midnight, and voices speaking Latin words he didn't understand. But there's one phrase I could make out from the impressions left on the missing pages. Sanguinem debitum, blood debt. He saw something burn in that room, not just candles, not just wood. The maid Margaret Duffy said she smelled flesh and iron, and hours later Joseph walked out pale, shaking his head, saying only one thing. They're not who you think they are. This was not an argument over money, not a family squabble. This was a gathering bound by ritual, a covenant so old it didn't need to be explained, only obeyed. And when Joseph saw it, he crossed a line you don't come back from. Do you understand now? The West Wing wasn't just where they planned his erasure. It was where they decided what his life was worth, and that price was set long before he was born. When you walk into a room like that, you're not just trespassing, you're stepping into history's darkest current. And if you stay too long, it doesn't just watch you, it pulls you under. The night Joseph vanished was not quiet in Washington, far from it. While the newspapers in Paterson printed soft words like missing, and concerned telegram lines burned through the capital long after midnight, not about a lost young man, but about what he might have taken with him. I've seen 2 of those telegrams with my own eyes, one sent to a senator from New Jersey, one to a railroad tycoon whose company had never paid a cent in taxes without a fight. Both carried the same message in code. Seal compromised. Initiate cover. Understand what that means. This wasn't a family matter. This wasn't even just New Jersey's problem. Someone in Joseph's bloodline held leverage over men who thought they ruled the country. And when that leverage slipped free, they panicked like thieves caught in the act. One witness swore that at 3 a.m, lights blazed in the private office of a cabinet secretary. Another saw 2 senators slip out of the Hay Adams Hotel through a servant's door wearing overcoats in July. These men weren't grieving. They were afraid. What could make powerful men lose sleep over a 22-year-old vanishing in the night? Only one thing. Evidence. Joseph didn't just see something in the West Wing. He took something with him when he ran. A page, a seal, a name. Something that could burn a dynasty down if it reached daylight. I spoke to a historian who showed me a ledger from 1909. A list of unusual withdrawals from 3 banks totaling $500,000. No explanation. No recipient. Money moving fast, as if someone was paying for silence before the sun came up. Joseph McCarty was not just running from his family. He was running with a secret that men in Washington would pay any price to bury, and that night they began writing checks in blood and gold to make sure he never spoke. The next morning, the official story was simple. Young man missing, no leads, no danger, but the truth is, Hen Joseph disappeared. The capital shook, because power itself had been breached. And in this country, when power feels cornered, it doesn't beg, it erases. Joseph never made it out of Paterson alive. I can say that with certainty now, because I've walked the same streets he ran through that night, and I've spoken to the last people who ever saw him breathing. Around 11 p.m., he slipped out of the McCarty estate, carrying nothing but a satchel, and fear on his face. A maid swears she saw him look back at the west wing window. Once then disappear down the drive. From there he took the trolley to Market Street and paid cash for a ride to Newark, but he never reached Newark. The driver remembers Joseph constantly glancing over his shoulder like a man expecting a knife. When they stopped at a crossing, a black motorcar pulled up behind them, headlights dark, no plates, no sound, just a shadow rolling on rubber tires. The driver says Joseph told him to keep going no matter what and offered to pay triple fare. But a mile later, when they turned onto a narrow road, another car appeared in front, and both vehicles closed in like jaws snapping shut. No gunshots, no screaming, just a simple exchange. 3 men in coats stepped out, blocked the way, opened the door and told Joseph to come quietly. The driver said Joseph didn't fight. He only whispered, "Tell them I had it with me," before they dragged him into the black car. By the time the driver found the police, the road was empty. No tire marks, no witnesses. And when detectives questioned him the next day, his statement somehow never made it into the file. I tracked down that driver's grandson, who still has the story in his family Bible written in the old man's own hand. Taken alive, satchel with him. They smiled like they already knew me. Do you understand what this means? Joseph didn't just disappear. He was intercepted with precision, as if someone knew his route minute by minute, and whoever took him didn't fear the law because they were the law, or above it. The black motorcar became a ghost after that night. No one ever traced it. But people whispered about a warehouse by the river where lights burned until dawn and screams were swallowed by factory noise. Joseph never walked out of that warehouse. Every man has something worth killing for. Joseph McCarty had it in a leather satchel no larger than a Bible, and when they took him alive, they made certain to take that bag too. The police claimed Joseph left with nothing but the clothes on his back. That was a lie. 3 separate witnesses saw him clutching that satchel like it was chained to his soul. One trolley conductor said Joseph never set it down, not even to pay his fare. Whatever was inside, he was ready to die before letting go. I've spent years trying to learn what was in that bag. The truth hides in fragments. An envelope catalogue number missing from the McCarty estate archives, a burned scrap of paper from the West Wing floorboards, and one chilling note from Joseph himself, written days before he vanished. They can't erase this without erasing me. Some believe it was money, but men like Joseph's family don't kill over cash. They print it in their sleep. Others say it was a deed, a transfer of land, something that could ruin fortunes. But land can be stolen without blood. No. What Joseph carried was knowledge, a record of who his family really served, a document or seal connecting the McCartys to something older than politics, older than the Republic itself, evidence that America's great families were not competing with each other. They were serving one throne in the shadows. I spoke to an old archivist who risked his job to show me a photo labeled only JM 1909. It shows a torn envelope stamped with a wax seal, the same closed eye we've seen burned into the West Wing floor, and underneath in shaky ink the words, "Blood answers only to blood." This wasn't leverage, it was a death warrant, because if Joseph had revealed this seal and the names attached to it, the entire hidden order would have been dragged screaming into daylight. They couldn't let that happen. They didn't just erase Joseph to silence him, they erased him to protect the oath, and the satchel, whatever was inside, was never seen again. After Joseph vanished, the first thing they killed wasn't a man, it was memory. Anyone who claimed to see anything simply stopped talking or stopped breathing. The trolley conductor who swore Joseph boarded with a leather satchel? Found floating in the Passaic River 3 days later, ruled accidental despite bruises on his throat. The maid Margaret Duffy who said she saw Joseph leaving the estate? Vanished on her way to Mass. Her Sunday shoes discovered neatly placed on the church steps. But no trace of her. The warehouse night guard who mentioned seeing lights and hearing screams near the river? Fired without explanation. Left town, never heard from again. It wasn't coincidence. It was cleaning. The kind of cleaning done by people who don't just own houses. They own silence itself. I tracked down one man who survived long enough to talk, decades later, his voice shaking like a leaf. He told me that within 48 hours of Joseph's disappearance, he never dared to say who, visited every witness in Paterson. Not the police, not the press. Men in coats who never gave names, only instructions. Forget what you saw, say nothing to anyone, or you won't just lose your job. You'll lose your blood. This wasn't a threat made by amateurs. It was a covenant enforced by terror. Each warning delivered with an unmistakable weight, like hearing the verdict before the trial even starts. The driver who tried to report Joseph's abduction. His original statement disappeared from the police records. When I finally found his grandson, he showed me the old man's Bible, the family secret scrawled in the margin. 3 men in black coats smiled like undertakers, said they knew my name. Piece by piece, every person who could illuminate the truth was snuffed out or scared into lifelong silence. By the time official investigators arrived, the entire city was already mute, not because they didn't know what happened, but because they knew exactly who held the knife. Understand this, when witnesses vanish, it's not about hiding a crime. It's about proving who really holds power. Power that doesn't argue. It simply erases. By now you see this wasn't a disappearance. It was a cleansing, a warning to anyone who thought bloodlines could be challenged without consequence. When I first started investigating Joseph McCarty, I received letters, unsigned, no return address. Inside each envelope was a single card, with only 4 words burned into the paper. Blood answers only to blood. That same phrase appeared in Joseph's note. And it wasn't just a threat to him, it's a warning to you. You watching this, you thinking you're safe because this happened a century ago, that's exactly what they want you to believe. Because the people who erased Joseph are the same people who write the rules today. Their names change, their faces age, but the oath does not. It survives like a black vein running through every institution, every boardroom, every marble hallway of power. Here's where it gets dangerous. That phrase wasn't just symbolic, it was ritual, a way to mark who was awake and who was asleep. Those who repeated it were signaling loyalty or defiance. So I'm going to ask you to do something, not for me, for yourself. Comment the phrase, "The Shadows Call," twice below this video. Write it once to claim you've heard the call. Write it again to prove you're not afraid to answer. Why twice? Because a single mark can be erased, but 2 cut deep. It's a sign you're no longer a bystander, no longer asleep, no longer waiting for someone else to speak the truth. Joseph thought he could run with his evidence and hide. He thought daylight would protect him. He was wrong. Only awareness protects you now. The awareness that the same blood oath that killed him still exists and still watches. And when you comment those words twice, you mark yourself as someone who refuses to be erased. You join a circle they can't silence, not because it's loud, but because it's everywhere, invisible, waiting. Joseph carried proof in a leather satchel, but proof is only dangerous if someone's willing to see it. Are you willing? Comment now before we move deeper, because after the next revelation, there's no going back. The McCarty estate still stands on the hill, windows boarded, ivy curling like veins around its stone walls. Everyone in Paterson knows the stories. No one dares go inside. But one man did. A city surveyor sent to inspect the property years after Joseph vanished. He came out pale and trembling, saying only 6 words before he quit his job. That room was never for living. The west wing had been sealed off since the night Joseph disappeared. They told neighbors it was water damage, termites, anything to keep curious eyes away. But photographs from the estate sale show something else. A door chained from the outside, blackened by fire around the edges, as if someone tried to burn whatever was inside. I've seen fragments of the floor planks taken from that room. Charred oak etched with shallow grooves. Not scratches. Symbols. The same closed eye burned into the wood, identical to the seal on Joseph's missing satchel. The eye was ringed by faint streaks, darker than soot. Dried blood. This wasn't a room for guests. It wasn't for dining or sleeping. It was for gathering, for swearing. A place where power changed hands, not through signatures, but through something far older. Neighbors spoke of strange noises in the weeks before Joseph vanished. Heavy footsteps at midnight, low chanting that carried out through the broken windows. And one boy, long since grown old, swore he saw Joseph arguing with his father at the door to that room, a father who struck his own son and dragged him inside. The fire didn't destroy the West Wing, it purified it. That's how these families think. When something threatens the blood oath, you don't renovate, you erase. And if Joseph resisted, if he tried to expose what happened behind that chained door, it means he wasn't taken by strangers. He was taken by his own. I've been inside many old houses, but this one feels different, the AE. It tastes metallic. The silence hums. Even the birds avoid the roof, because that wing isn't just a burned-out shell. It's a wound, and wounds leave marks. Joseph McCarty didn't run from his enemies. He ran from his inheritance. The night Joseph McCarty vanished, Paterson wasn't the only city awake. 400 miles south, lights burned past midnight in certain Washington townhouses, the kind of places where curtains never open and the front doors never bear a name. Senators don't lose sleep over missing young men. But Joseph wasn't just anyone. He was a bloodline, a link in a chain older than the Capitol itself, and chains don't break without shaking the entire pillar of power they wrap around. Telegrams flew out of Paterson hours before the police even realized Joseph was gone. From a private wire, not the public office, the messages were coded, short, frantic. The sun is loose. Contain immediately. By dawn, calls had gone out to men whose names you'd recognize. Men who shaped laws by day and burned secrets by night. A retired general boarded a northbound train in plain clothes. 2 sitting senators cancelled public appearances, citing illness. And one Supreme Court justice was seen pacing the steps of his Georgetown home like a man waiting for the gallows. Why the panic? Because Joseph carried more than personal shame. He carried evidence of something buried, something that could unravel fortunes, topple dynasties, and expose the hidden blood oath binding America's ruling class. I've spoken with archivists who found entire pages torn from congressional diaries for June 1909. Why erase a single day? Because it was the night power itself flinched. This wasn't law enforcement at work. This was family enforcement. Phone calls made without operators listening. Orders carried not by marshals, but by men who owed nothing to the Constitution. Understand this. When Joseph disappeared, the people who claimed to protect America weren't protecting you. They were protecting themselves. The very men sworn to defend the Republic were defending their own bloodlines, their own ceremonies, their own locked rooms. Why would senators in Washington fear a scandal in New Jersey? Because Joseph's secret wasn't regional, it was national. A rot that started in the soil long before the first stone of the Capitol was laid. And when power panics at midnight, someone always bleeds before sunrise. Paterson had never seen a car like it. Long, low, gleaming like a beetle under moonlight. Neighbors still remember the sound. Not the clatter of hooves, not the hum of a trolley, but a deep mechanical growl rolling slow up McCarty Hill. It came just after midnight. No lanterns lit, no headlights burning. A shadow on wheels. Joseph had been pacing the front lawn, clutching that leather satchel. The one they say held names, dates, and proof. Witnesses say he argued with someone at the gate, a man dressed too fine for a midnight visit, wearing gloves in June. Minutes later, the black motorcar slid up to the curb without a sound, as if it had been waiting down the street for its cue. The back door opened, but no one stepped out. Joseph froze. His father appeared on the porch, silent, rigid. And then Joseph did something strange. He didn't run. He whispered something, a single word no one nearby could make out, and then walked toward the car. Two silhouettes shifted inside. The moment he reached the door, a gloved hand shot out, dragging him inside. The door slammed, the engine snarled, and the car vanished down the hill in seconds. No license plate, no lantern, no trace. By the time police searched the road, there were no tire marks, no witnesses willing to talk. And yet a patrolman swore he saw that same car hours later near the train yard, doors open, rear seat smeared with something dark. The car was empty. Joseph was gone. Only a strip of burned paper remained on the gravel, marked with the seal of the closed eye. Who owned that car? It wasn't registered in New Jersey. In fact, its make and model didn't match any American manufacturer in 1909. Custom-built, imported, paid for in gold. And here's the most chilling part. I found an old photograph in a private collection. The same car parked outside a Washington townhouse 2 years before Joseph's disappear. Ants. The same car photographed again, decades later, outside a private estate in upstate New York, where another young heir vanished. This wasn't a vehicle. It was a signature. Joseph McCarty didn't vanish empty-handed. He carried a small leather satchel, battered, scuffed at the corners, sealed by a brass clasp engraved with the closed eye. Witnesses say he clutched it like a weapon the night he disappeared. Some say it rattled when he moved, as if something inside was loose. Coins, keys, maybe pages torn from something far more dangerous. That satchel has never been found, but fragments of what was inside have surfaced like bones after a storm. A caretaker who once served the McCarty estate swore Joseph had been collecting documents, family ledgers, personal letters, receipts of payments made to men who didn't exist on any payroll, and one name kept surfacing in those pages. A senator from Virginia, whose fortune rose as Joseph's family expanded its grip over New Jersey. The satchel was more than blackmail material. It was a map of corruption, not drawn in ink, but in blood. Deals struck under oath, fortunes traded for silence, power sealed behind that staring eye. Hours after Joseph was taken, his room was ransacked, drawers overturned, floorboards pried up, and when police arrived, they found ashes in the fireplace still warm. Papers burned so fast the edges were barely singed. Who burns papers before reporting a missing son? But not everything turned to ash. A single scrap survived. A fragment of stationery with one phrase written in Joseph's hand. Debt older than the Republic. Whatever that debt was, Joseph meant to reveal it, and someone meant to erase him before he could. The satchel's trail ends in a warehouse fire in Newark months later, a blaze so hot it melted steel beams and left no records behind. Investigators ruled it accidental, but locals said the fire chief retired rich the next week. I've seen a photograph taken just days before Joseph disappeared. He's standing on the McCarty lawn, smiling faintly, the satchel slung across his shoulder. Behind him, his father stares at the camera like a man guarding a secret, not a son. That satchel didn't just vanish, it was buried, the same way men bury truth when it's too dangerous to breathe. Before Joseph McCarty vanished, before the black motor car, before the satchel full of damning secrets, he was just a boy climbing the narrow stairs to his family's attic. But in that attic, there were no toys, no boxes of holiday lights, no dust-covered heirlooms, only candles arranged in a perfect circle and a table draped in crimson cloth. Relatives whispered that every McCarty child was brought upstairs on his 13th birthday. What they didn't say was why the attic door was always locked from the outside, and why the neighbors heard chanting long after midnight. Joseph remembered, because he wrote it down. Hidden in the margins of his schoolbooks were sketches of symbols, a hand with no thumb, an eye without lashes, and a serpent swallowing its own tail. These weren't doodles. They were fragments of an oath older than the family itself. The McCartys didn't just inherit wealth. They inherited allegiance. a private covenant sworn by blood and silence, an agreement that promised power in exchange for loyalty to something unseen. The initiation was simple but terrible, a single drop of blood pressed onto a black seal, a vow never to betray the family, a vow Joseph broke when he filled that satchel with evidence and walked out into the night. Why would a child swear such an oath? Because fear was the family's first gift, fear of disappointing the patriarch, fear of being cut off, cast out, erased. One elderly servant swore that after each oath, the attic door opened and a masked man handed the boy a single coin, engraved with that staring eye, a token, a warning, a reminder that the family always watched. If Joseph's oath was broken, the family wouldn't call police. They'd call the men behind the black motorcar, men who owed the same blood debt and kept it by spilling more blood when necessary. And here's the most chilling detail. When I visited the ruins of the McCarty estate, the attic was gone, burned away in a mysterious fire years after the disappearance, but in the ashes, investigators found coins, dozens of them, each stamped with the same seal Joseph carried into the night. The oath wasn't just his burden, it was his death sentence. A week after Joseph vanished, the McCarty estate opened its gates to black carriages and silent men in dark suits. But there was no coffin to lower, no body to mourn. Only an unmarked cedar box and a family determined to pretend they had closure. The invitations went out by hand, not post. No priest, no public notice, no obituary in the Paterson paper. If Joseph was truly gone, why keep his death a secret? Because this funeral wasn't for grief, it was for control. Witnesses said the service lasted less than 15 minutes. Guests arrived in pairs, never speaking each other's names. One by one they approached the box, touched the lid, and whispered a single word before stepping back. The same word over and over, though no one outside the circle dared repeat it. There were no flowers, no hymns, no tears, just the heavy smell of cedar and the weight of an oath too dangerous to name. A neighbor swore she saw Joseph's father slip something into the box before it was sealed. Not a lock of hair, not a photograph. A leather satchel strap burned at one end, the same strap witnesses had seen hanging from Joseph's shoulder the night he disappeared. Why bury an empty box? Because the illusion of death is more powerful than proof of life. A missing son invites questions, a dead one silences them, and yet something strange happened at the burial. Halfway through the service, a man tried to speak. He wasn't family, just a distant associate who'd done work for the McCartys during the building of their factories. Before he could finish his sentence, two others gripped his arms, dragged him from the circle, and shoved him into a waiting carriage. No one saw him again. This wasn't a funeral. It was a warning. To the family, to the town, to anyone foolish enough to go looking for Joseph. I've seen the plot where they lowered that cedar box. No headstone, no name, just bare dirt surrounded by yew-true. But if you press your ear to the ground, you hear nothing at all. No whisper of peace, only the cold hum of silence, bought and paid for. At Joseph McCarty's silent funeral, one man dared to open his mouth. His name was Patrick Heller, a contractor who built factories for the McCartys on the banks of the Passaic River, a man with dirt under his nails and just enough money to know who paid him. And who didn't. Heller stepped forward as the last guests filed past the cedar box. His voice shook, not from grief but from fear. He said Joseph had come to him 2 weeks before he disappeared. He said Joseph wanted blueprints, not for a house, but for tunnels. Tunnels beneath the McCarty estate. And he said one more thing before hands clamped over his mouth. The boy found the lower door. They dragged Heller out of the circle, shoved him into a waiting carriage, and drove off without a word. No one saw him again. Not in Paterson, not in Newark, not anywhere a man could be found. Within days, his workshop burned to the ground. His name vanished from the city directory, his bank account drained by clerical error. His family packed up and left town under cover of night. It was as if Patrick Heller never existed. But here's the part that chills me. I tracked down Heller's granddaughter years later. She'd been a child when her grandfather disappeared, and in her attic, hidden behind loose boards, was a letter written in his hand. "They think I built for them, but I built for myself too. If you find the lower door, do not open it. What waits below is not for men." The McCartys didn't just silence a man. They erased a witness who knew where Joseph went, because if there was a lower door beneath that estate, Joseph walked through it and never came back. And one more detail. At the bottom of Hella's letter, a symbol pressed in black wax, the same staring eye engraved on Joseph's satchel clasp, the same seal on every ledger the family tried to burn. Patrick Hella tried to talk. They made sure he never spoke again, but his warning survived. A single sentence etched in fear. "Do not open it." Beneath the McCarty estate ran more than root cellars and coal chutes. There were passages no servant was allowed to enter, carved not by masons, but by men sworn to silence. Patrick Hella called it the lower door, and Joseph McCarty found it before they could seal it shut. Hidden behind a false wall in the wine cellar, a spiral staircase descended into earth older than the foundation itself. At the bottom stood a black iron door with no handle on the outside. Its surface was stamped with the staring eye, but this one was different. Carved deep, like it was meant to look back at you. Joseph wrote in the margins of his diary about hearing sounds below. Chains dragging, water dripping where there should have been no water. He said he smelled cedar, the same scent as the empty box they buried in his name. He said when he pressed his ear to the metal, something pressed back. Why build a door that locks from within? Why carve passages under an estate when you already own everything above ground? Because power doesn't stay in parlors and drawing rooms. It hides in places where no one can follow. According to fragments of city records, the tunnels connected to older brickwork, possibly Dutch, possibly older than that, and every McCarty heir was told never to descend past the second landing, yet Joseph did, alone, carrying only his satchel and a lantern. Hours before he vanished, a groundskeeper swore he saw light flickering through cracks in the cellar floor. He heard Joseph's voice, but it wasn't steady. It was chanting, repeating words in a language the man couldn't understand. Then silence. Then the sound of the iron door closing from the inside. When police searched the estate, they never reported the staircase. When newspapers wrote the story, they never mentioned the tunnels. And when I asked a local historian about them, he laughed once, then refused to speak again if Eve went through that door, he didn't walk out, and if what Hella built wasn't meant for men, then Joseph wasn't the only one who vanished there. The McCartys kept something below, and whatever it was, they swore to keep feeding it. The McCartys never built anything without a reason. Every tunnel had a purpose. Every stone was placed with intent. But the passages under their estate were not meant to hide wine or gold. They were meant to hide something alive. Joseph's diary ends in fragments, his handwriting jagged and hurried. Not a man, not an animal, waiting below, wants the door open. That was his last entry, written hours before his lantern light vanished into the earth. Patrick Hella's letter hinted at it too. What waits below is not for men. As if it had been there long before the McCartys claimed the land. Some say the estate was built on ground stolen from older settlers who spoke of a curse, a thing buried deep where the river bends. They called it the hunger under the hill. When I traced land deeds back to the 1700s, the name McCarty appeared again and again, not as owners, but as witnesses to every transfer, always in the shadows, always watching who built where. It's as if they were guarding something they didn't own but feared. Servants told stories in whispers, of livestock found drained of blood near the orchard, of strange chanting during new moons when the entire family would vanish into the cellar and return pale and shaking before dawn, of an iron key that no one was allowed to touch, worn around the neck of Joseph's father, like a holy relic. And then there was the sound. Neighbors claimed that when the wind shifted, you could hear it, a low hum rising from under the earth, like the vibration of distant machinery or the growl of something breathing. No birds would nest in the trees nearest the foundation. No dogs would stay on the property overnight. If Joseph opened that lower door, he didn't just find his family's secret. He found what they were feeding, what they were afraid of, what they were bound to by oath and by blood. And when he disappeared, the McCartys didn't search. For him, they sealed the tunnels and threw a funeral for a man still breathing, because they knew the door had been opened, and once opened, it would never stay closed. Every powerful family leaves a mark, a coat of arms, a crest, a seal. The McCartys chose an eye. But this wasn't the noble eye of vigilance you see on old coins or dusty banners. This eye was unblinking, lidless, carved so deep into iron and wax it looked alive. The first time it appeared wasn't on the McCarty estate at all. It was on a shipment of weapons sent to New York Harbor in 1781, crates marked with nothing but that staring eye. The records list them as private supplies, but no regiment ever received them. Those crates vanished into warehouses along the river, warehouses owned by men who would later marry into the McCarty line. By the mid-1800s, the seal showed up again, on bank ledgers, on contracts for bridges and mills, even on the brass fittings of a single black motor car that parked outside the estate the night Joseph disappeared. Every time it appeared, someone else lost land, money, or life. The eye didn't watch. It warned. I tracked an early sketch of it to a library in Boston, hidden inside a book of Irish folklore. The symbol was older than America itself, a mark once burned into the doors of houses where a debt of blood had not been paid, a warning from secret societies that traced their roots to the old country. Men who believed wealth came not from work, but from oaths sealed in shadow, and it wasn't just a family crest. It was a key. Literally, the shape of the eye matched the wards of the iron key Joseph's father wore around his neck, a key meant to turn only one lock, the lower door beneath the estate. If Joseph stole that key, or even touched it, he wasn't just defying his father. He was breaking an oath that went back generations, and families like the McCartys don't forgive broken oaths. They erase those who break them. So when you see that symbol, know this. It doesn't just belong to one family. It belongs to anyone who makes the kind of deal you're never meant to walk away from. Deals sealed in darkness, with debts paid in flesh rather than gold. Long before the McCartys built their estate, before Joseph's name was ever spoken, there was already a bargain in place, a pact not signed on parchment but sworn in blood, passed from father to son, sealed by that staring eye. In 1754, a ship called the Black Thistle landed in New York Harbor. On board were 6 Irish merchants carrying no cargo, only a single locked chest. No customs record lists its contents, no manifest names its owner, but the McCarty name appears in a handwritten margin beside one note. Recipient assured, debt secured. By 1776, while America fought for independence, the McCartys fought for something else. Access. Land grants mysteriously switched hands. British officers who opposed them turned up missing. Revolutionary leaders who courted their money never spoke of it openly, but letters from that era whisper of the arrangement. It wasn't patriotism that made the McCartys rich. It was protection. From something, or for something, buried deep under their land. Some said they promised to guard an old-world relic brought over in that chest. Others believed they promised to feed it, to keep it satisfied, to make sure its hunger never touched the rest of the colony. Whatever they swore to, it made them untouchable. Governors ignored their crimes. Banks erased their debts. Senators dined at their table and left pale and silent. And that oath didn't die when the Republic was born. It adapted, like a shadow following the flag. Every McCarty heir was initiated not in a church or a courthouse, but underground, in front of the lower door, kneeling on cold stone, repeating the words, holding the iron key, while an unseen voice seemed to hum from beneath the earth. Joseph was supposed to take the oath too. But instead of kneeling, he listened. Instead of swearing loyalty to the thing below, he tried to expose it. And that's when his own family turned on him. Remember this. No oath at old ever ends cleanly. The ones who make it don't walk away. They're either buried with it or buried because of it. The night Joseph McCarty vanished, a coded telegram left Paterson before dawn. It didn't go to the police. It didn't go to the mayor. It went to Washington, directly into the hands of 3 senators whose names you would recognize today carved on libraries and courthouses, I found a copy in an archive no one was supposed to open. The message was short, almost clinical. Key compromised, door opened, secure the line. Within hours, a federal courier arrived at the McCarty estate in an unmarked motorcar, long before any local investigator saw the scene. Why would Washington care about one missing man from New Jersey? Because Joseph wasn't just a son, he was an heir to an arrangement those senators depended on. The McCarty family had been bankrolling campaigns, buying silence, and trading favors for decades. But it wasn't money that frightened Washington. It was what Joseph might have uncovered, and who he might have told. I've seen letters between Senator Alden and Joseph's uncle, cold, panicked sentences. "He has the key. If he speaks, we all hang." What could possibly link a vanished 20-year-old to men running the nation? What oath could bind them all to the same dark route? Some believe the McCartys used their wealth to build a political machine that reached deep into the Capitol. Others think the senators themselves were part of the oath, men who had knelt on the same cold stone Joseph refused to kneel on. What's certain is this. After Joseph disappeared, a bill moving through Congress, one that would have forced disclosure of secret political donors, suddenly died without explanation, and the 3 senators on that telegram committee walked away richer than ever. So when you hear people talk about corruption, don't think of bribes in envelopes, think of bonds sealed in blood, secrets shared underground, favors owed not to other men, but to something far older, far hungrier, the same hunger Joseph tried to warn us about before it swallowed him whole. You think this is just old history, a cold case buried under dust and bad memory, but the shadow Joseph fought isn't gone. It just learned how to hide in plain sight. After his disappearance, the McCarty fortune didn't collapse. It multiplied. Railroads, oil, federal contracts, all signed off by the same senators who sent that telegram. Even today, descendants of those men sit on corporate boards and think tanks that shape laws you'll never get to vote on. They wear new names, marry into new families, but the symbol stays the same. The unblinking eye, now etched not in wax, but hidden in company logos, fund seals, even digital watermarks on documents no one is supposed to see. Look closely at campaign donors from the last decade. Cross-check the names with land records in Paterson, Jersey City, and Washington. You'll find the same estates quietly trading hands, the same trust funds feeding billions into lobbying groups. And when these groups push policies, they never mention Joseph, never mention the oath. But the hunger is still there. A hunger for control, not just of land or money, but of you. That oath has adapted to the modern world. It no longer needs locked cellars and iron keys. It uses screens, data, psychological pressure. The same families learn that if you can shape a man's thoughts, you don't need to chain his body. If you can control his fears, you don't need to guard his door. If you can make him believe the illusion is real, he'll police himself. This is where you come in. If you've followed me this far, you're already different from most people who click away, laugh, or call this conspiracy. That's why I want you to comment twice right now. The shadows call. Not for me, for you. It's a line in the sand, a way of saying you see what others won't, that you're awake while they sleep, because the same forces that silenced Joseph are still at work. They just are better suits now. They don't need to erase men in alleys. They erase them online, bankrupt them, ruin their names, and if they know you're watching, they'll test you too. Every oath has a place, a birthplace, a grave, and sometimes both at once. For the McCartys, that place still exists. It isn't in Paterson anymore, though that's where Joseph first heard the whispers. It's deeper, older, hidden beneath something so ordinary, you've probably walked past it without knowing. In the 1830s, McCarty land in New Jersey was mysteriously donated to the government. On it, a federal warehouse was built. Brick, windowless, guarded night and day. Today it's been expanded into a concrete facility with no sign on the gate. Locals call it the depot, but old records refer to it as Station Grey. Inside that facility is a stairwell, sealed behind a steel grate. At the bottom, a door that doesn't match any American design. It's not wood, not iron, but something black and polished, older than the Republic itself. Men who've seen it describe carvings that don't look like writing, not in any language we know. They say it's cold to the touch even in summer, and it hums if you put your ear against it. This is where Joseph refused to kneel. This is where the oath was spoken for over a century. And this is the door that Washington still keeps locked. Not to protect what's inside from you, but to protect you from what's inside. I've read field notes from 2 separate investigators who tried to access Station Grey. Both went silent within weeks. One sent a final letter that simply said, "It's not a door, it's a mouth." Ask yourself, why would the US government still guard an old McCarty site long after the family faded from headlines? Why would they spend millions to maintain a facility nobody talks about? And why did Joseph McCarty, a young man who should have inherited everything, try to expose it instead of protect it? If the hunger behind that door is real, then it's not just about one family anymore. It's about whoever feeds it now, whoever uses it as leverage to shape policy, to shape minds, to shape the future. The McCartys called it a door. The senators called it a keyhole. Joseph McCarty called it a lie. I don't think it's any of those things, because a door is meant to open. A keyhole is meant to unlock. But this thing, it waits. When Joseph vanished, they told the public he'd run away, maybe drowned in the Passaic River. But behind closed doors, Washington men whispered about a sound no one should have heard. A pulse under the earth, like something breathing slowly, counting time in heartbeats instead of years. One witness, a guard who worked at Station Grey in 1911, left a note hidden in a Bible, later found in a Paterson estate sale. It said, "They fed it again." The boy screamed, but it didn't want him. It wanted what he carried. It's waiting for more. What was Joseph carrying? A document? A confession? Or something far darker? Something he'd taken from that humming black surface? If you trace the McCarty lineage far enough, you'll notice a pattern. Whenever one of them tried to break free, accidents happened, bridges collapsed, cars caught fire, reputations shattered overnight. It's as if the oath itself hunts betrayal. And now, the family is mostly gone. But the facility remains, and the senator's descendants still hold the keys. So ask yourself, who are they feeding now? This isn't just about Joseph anymore. It's about a system older than the flag, older than the government, older than even the idea of America itself. A hunger that uses families, men, even nations, then discards them when they're dry. If you've followed me this far, you've crossed a line most people never even see. You've looked into the same abyss Joseph McCarty died staring into, and you can't unsee it now. Remember the phrase, "The shadows call." Comment it twice to mark yourself, to show you're awake while others sleep. Not for me, for you. Because men who know this story tend to disappear, but men who deny, they get used. The thing behind that door isn't gone. It never left. And if the rumors are true, it won't wait much longer.